Okay.
Yay for
Okay.
the Air Force is always underrepresented.
Oh, yeah, Air Force. We got some Navy, we got some Air Force, we got some Army, Navy combinations here. We have a lot. Welcome, everybody, to Military Dinner Conversations. My name is Jen Barnhill. I'm a columnist with military.com. I am also a military spouse, a Navy spouse. Um, I'm an active duty service member. And the reason we're having this conversation today is because I want to understand what's going on in the employment space. I want to give you an opportunity to talk with our guest, Sue Hoppin, if you have questions, but really wanting to get to the bottom of some of the things we're talking about with employment. Like, where are we at? Where have things gotten better? Where are we still seeing hurdles? I want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly. For the purposes of just housekeeping, for those who have not participated in a call like this, what we'll do is I'll introduce Sue. Then after that, and she'll talk about what she does and some of her work. After that, I'll launch some poll questions that will kind of get the conversation started to try to understand where everyone's at when it comes to employment, their background, and that will help guide the conversation. As we move forward with that, I'm going to ask someone to expand on that poll question. So if you have an opinion, you're willing to come off mute and share that. That will help guide the conversation as well. And again, if you have an experience and you have a contradictory experience to what someone else would share, I really want to hear those different experiences. There is no wrong answer. This is just a conversation. You can do that by either raising your hand, coming off mute, or just indicating that you'd like to share. And we'll just be courteous of each other's time and sharing and getting right to it. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Sue Hoppin of the National Military Spouse Network. For those of you who don't know her, she has been working in the employment space. I'm not going to give the date, Sue. I'll let you decide if you want to do that or not. But for some time now, and she is a force. I work with Sue on the Career Connections magazine over at NMSN, and so I knew she was the perfect guest to have. She can answer questions that we have about things that have happened in employment space and where she thinks things are going, but I don't want to take words out of your mouth. So Sue, feel free to come off mute and share a little bit about yourself, and NMSN.
I love that you're like hesitant to tell everybody I'm old. I love that so much. But no, I've been working in this space for over 2 decades, which is kind of telling because a lot of has happened for the military spouse employment community in the last 15 years. But really before then, no one was talking about military spouse employment and no one was really talking about military spouses, right? I remember when I entered this space, I was working for a military affiliated nonprofit and I was meeting, iconic people at these conferences, and they were asking me, "So, honey, what do you do?" And I'm like, "I work military spouse issues." And they're like, "You mean you work military family issues? No one works military spouse issues." And this was coming from someone at a big family-oriented VSO, MSO. And I'm like, "No, I think we deserve our own space, and that's what I do." And it was really funny because in the early days, I would get laughed at because it's like military spouses are such a niche community. What could you possibly have to do? I'm like, we have so much to do. And that's why I kind of shake my head a little bit when Jen says that, it's moving so slow, because for those of us who've been in this space for a very long time, we've come so far. And it's a really good time right now because I don't know what you know about NMSN, but I started it 14 years ago when I left that nonprofit because I realized that they had done everything they could do for military spouses because their focus is really on the veteran, where it should be, right? And the service member, because that was in their charter. That's what they're supposed to do. But I'm like, DOD has all these programs for military spouses who are just starting off, maybe don't have a career, maybe don't have a degree. And that's where the focus should be, right? For the people who really do need the help and getting a head start. But I realized that we had a lot of professional military spouses who were not being served. We weren't self-identifying, people who already had degrees, people who already had businesses, people who were already in the workforce. And I'm like, you know what? No one's really going to care about us unless we care about ourselves. So I started NMSN as a social enterprise. We're not a nonprofit. We exist for one thing, and that is to eliminate military spouse unemployment. And it was so funny because every time I tell people that, they're like, that seems big, hairy, and audacious. And Admiral Ryan, who I worked for at the time, would have it no other way, right? He's like, you need a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that is our singular reason for existing. And when that problem is solved, I get to go off into the sunset, hopefully soon, and do something else. But I do think that we have had a lot of successes because when you think about where we started just 14, 15, 16 years ago, before, when no one was talking about spouses. And now we're invited to the table and we're creating the tables. And I just think of our white paper that we started writing 6 years ago, and Hiba Abdul is on here, and she helped us with one of our initiatives, and she's been advocating with us for years. And Jen also has been advocating for us with us for years, and done some of our trainings. We started writing these white papers 6 years ago because there's so many great reports out there from all these organizations, and they all point to one thing, which is that military spouse unemployment is still high. I'm like, freaking, I get it. We all get it. Military spouse unemployment is high. What are you going to do about it? What are the solutions? And at the time, no one was really offering any solutions. I'm like, we can do this. We don't want to, reinvent the wheel. We don't want to step over what anybody else is doing, but we can fill in the gap. Which is, let's introduce some common sense solutions. And that's what we've been doing with the white papers. If you're not familiar with them, I'll drop a link, or maybe Jen can drop a link underneath, and you can go right to them. And we've been really fortunate that some of our recommendations have been introduced as legislation. Some of them have passed. If you saw the White House signing the memorandum of agreement between the State Department and DOD a couple weeks ago, I was really honored to be on stage. Hiba was in the room. I'm sure a bunch of you were in the room. And that was amazing because we wrote about that 2 years ago, and it was the recognition, that this was an issue when the White House came out and said, oh, the federal government wants to be the employer of choice for military spouses. And then a couple days later, the State Department said, you know what, curtail all DETOs, which is domestic employees telework opportunities. He was gonna be so excited. I know that acronym. The opportunity for military spouses in the federal government to actually get a DETO agreement from their agency that allows them to take their job overseas and move with it seamlessly. And it was working. It could scale, right? And then unceremoniously, in the same week that the federal government decided it wanted to be the employer of choice, the State Department decided to curtail all DETOs for military spouses until they could figure out what's going on. Well, the spouses came to us and, we're like, you need to take this on. And we're like, we're not going to take this on for you, but we will teach you how to take it on for yourselves. We'll teach you how to organize at the federal government. We'll teach you how to advocate. And when you figure it out, we will introduce you to the people you need to know at the White House, at DOD, and state to fix this problem. And that's exactly what we did. And then they took it from there. They advocated, and every once in a while they come in for a course correction, and we were pushing on it on our end. They're pushing on their end. And it was great because this was like an example of what active grassroots advocacy could do to solve a problem. And it's not even like an ambiguous hypothetical problem. One of the spouses calculated that the loss of income to her family was $240,000 just at that one assignment because of that arbitrary memo, right? We call it arbitrary. I'm sure they had a reason. But it's this kind of grassroots advocacy that we really work with, right? And we've also had success with our WOTC expansion recommendation, which is the work opportunity tax credit. We've recommended that it be expanded to include military spouses as target work group. I personally have been working this issue since 2004. And then at NMSN, we resurrected it, and we were able to get it reintroduced. And at the highest level, at the peak, I think in the 116th Congress, we ended up with 282 bipartisan co-sponsors, which is huge, right? But the congressional cycle is harsh in that every 2 years that Congress ends and you have to do it all over again. So it's been a real education piece for us with the spouses, and because it's devastating, right? Like they finally get off off the sidelines and they advocate, and then nothing happens because their members can't get it across the finish line. We're frustrated, they're frustrated, but we go back. Our day of advocacy is next week, and we're doing it all over again because we understand the only thing that's gonna make a difference is persistence. You guys are all welcome to join us. We will train you, we will help you, and all we do is tell the story to legislators to remind them that military spouses are out here, remind them the need is still there, and then to encourage them to continue supporting our community. And if they ask what they can do, we actually have recommendations, and we have legislation they can sign on to. So it's a really easy lift, and honestly, it's fun. It's actually, it's an opportunity for you to speak truth to power. And the big thing that you do when you get in front of the legislators is you tell them your story, much as you're doing now with Jen. And that's really powerful because when less than 1% serves and less than 8% has ever served, they may want to help us, but they don't know our issues. They don't know us. So they need someone in there to actually tell them these are the issues. And we have those graphics. We have like Jen actually made those graphics. Like we have like this is the percentage of people looking for work. This is why it's so difficult to obtain childcare. This is the number of military families that are experiencing food insecurity. We have all the data for you. And all you have to do is go talk to your member and tell your story. What we can't do is tell your story, because they need to know that you guys are their constituents, that you care, and that you vote. I went way over my 10 minutes, so I'm
You're
gonna
totally fine, Sue. Well, I appreciate you sharing. There's so much to share. And one of the reasons why this conversation is important and why I don't think it's like duplicative, where we've had this conversation before, is the issues are ever evolving, I think. And as employment challenges change in the civilian landscape, they're changing for spouses. Like the things that we thought with COVID could be really great for military spouses. I don't know. Are they great? Are they turning out to be good? Is remote opportunities, are they really available? Are we still seeing things like discrimination because we're not getting hired because they think that we know that you're leaving in 2 years or whatnot? So that's why we're here to have this conversation, is to kind of see what is evolving, what you are seeing, how are those amazing updates that Sue shared playing out in real life? Like, what is the execution of those policy changes looking like for people? Because not always is it as intended. And so where can people step in and help? So I did launch the first poll question, so feel free to take a second to answer that. Anyone's welcome to answer the poll questions, even if you don't want to come off mute and share. It really just gives me an idea of where everyone is at with their employment status is the first question. Because and this is current employment status. We'll talk about historical because it's not always a point in time. So that said, I would love to just hear from anyone who is willing to, of why they're here. What about this conversation it drew you to wanting to participate, especially those who are military spouses who have maybe been on the unemployment, they're not employed as much. And what brought you here? Is anyone willing to kind of share that today? And again, I'll tell you, I don't mind awkward silences, so I'll just wait.
I can just share why I'm here, and maybe I have a different perspective. But actually, so I'm an Army spouse. I have 20 years experience in my chosen career field, 15 whilst my spouse has been on active duty. But I think like I have two things like when it comes to military spouse unemployment. One, there seems to be a lack of role models. So throughout my career, I have never actually seen kind of put in front of me role models that have made dual careers work up to the senior ranks. So my husband served as a colonel. We were pretty much one of the only couples that both had successful careers. So I really like to see the narrative around success stories and role models. And the other thing is, I think you have to segment the military spouse population, because one thing that I often discuss with my friends is that a spouse that got married at 18 with a high school diploma is going to have a very different career experience than a spouse that got married at 35 with an advanced degree and 10 years of experience in the workforce. So as we are trying to understand the problems and how we can find solutions, how are we going about actually segmenting the demographic that is the military spouse to make sure that we're providing the right solution to the issues faced by that target demographic? Um, and I have missed seeing that throughout my kind of 15 years as a military spouse. But I would think for certain segments, the affordability of daycare is a big kind of hurdle, right? So to actually go out and work, you have to be able to earn more than what it costs for daycare. Whereas for other people, it's really the licensing, the advanced kind of degrees that they have, how they translate state by state and different things like that. So that was just two perspectives that I wanted to add.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. We do need to think about that. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Elizabeth, would you like to share?
Absolutely. And I apologize, I am under the weather, so excuse my voice. But I'll actually just kind of add to what she said in that I think that maybe one of the challenges is that um, we are so diverse in when we come into this lifestyle, and many other factors. So that may be part of the challenge, is that outside perception, whether it's from employers, whether it's from the general public. So that was a great point. So my perspective, I've also been a military spouse for 15 years. We've actually been together for 25 years. So he came in the military a little bit late at 25. So I was still definitely, early 20s. But so my perspective is I put that I'm unemployed. I actually have had a variety of things over the years, right? I just finished up a internship with a large organization, one of these programs for military and veterans, military spouses and veterans that are, looking to gain experience. So I have that kind of perspective, but also I'm 40 years old. I'm definitely mid-career. I definitely see where compared to, when I came into this internship, I'm looking at the directors in the company and I'm like, gosh, we're the same age. I could be there, but here I am as an intern, right? So I just have that perspective, having been in the military community for 15 years and the different trials and tribulations that I've gone through, reflecting on that, but also like, how can we make it better moving forward, not just for myself, but for all military spouses. And I agree. I think there's so much that has been done and there's so many great programs, but how do we some of these programs, how do we make it more than just filtering the military community in and out of them, and then they're still unemployed? How can we do better in so many ways?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can I ask you a follow-up question? Is that okay?
Sure.
And you can say no to the question if you don't want to, but sometimes we make these decisions, as a military spouse myself, we make employment decisions along the way, often early in our military marriages or careers, not knowing the implications. Can I ask, was there a certain point in your experience that you made a decision that maybe you think you can point back to? Is there anything like that? Like, what are those decision points for you?
There are two that stand out for me. One is when right before my first child was born. So we were at Fort Drum. He's 13 now. So that many years ago, I was employed. It's funny because it wasn't making a lot, but the locals of that area were like, "Oh, you're really lucky to be in the shop." I'm like, okay. We did the math. We were getting ready for, preparing for the birth of a child, him to deploy right after, because thankfully they were letting him stay until the birth, and looking at me doing the commute. And we did the math, and I would be paying them $50 a week essentially to work there. And so that was a decision. I was like, it just doesn't make sense. I'm going to have a newborn. I'm going to be commuting an hour. And so that led to, it was 5 years. I think it was 5 years later that I looked to re-enter the workforce. So I definitely think there was a setback there for sure. 5 years later, I go to enter the workforce. I get a great job with a nonprofit, and I went into it. I was like, they have this position, but I have my eye on that management position. Like, I knew from the start, like I'm taking lower than where I should, but my eye's on the prize. And 3 years later, because we were actually stationary for 3 years, I did move up to a senior level, but not management. I think part of it too, another thing you can't control is if you end up in any sort of toxic work environment where you're prevented from moving up. And then from there, after 3 years, we moved, and we spent the next 4 years moving 4 times. So I definitely think, having gone back in, I did that work, but then that leads me to where I am now. I'm like re-entering again. And, a lot of things that are coming my way tend to be in that closer to entry level. And like, gosh, I am so not an entry level employee. And I have so much life experience on top of my work experience. And I don't think that gets recognized enough. Nobody can project manage like a military spouse who has set up house 4 times in 4 years from overseas to East Coast to West Coast and back to East Coast. Those are some skills right there that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Jenny. I saw you came off or raise your hand.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, I've wanted to join these conversations, but schedule does not really match it. So thank you, Heather, for reminding me about this. So I'm a foreign-born spouse. My husband and I got married almost 2 years in August. And I was so happy. I finished my grad school degree in Japan. That's where we met. And then my husband is not a planner. So, and I did not know two of the spouse or the fiance type of visa. Because I was like visiting him prior to that. I was visiting him, and it would have been my third visit to like my boyfriend, that time. But yeah, we got married, and of course I was very happy. But then the reality of it is like, oops, like you can't work yet because you have to go through immigration and all that. But apart from that, okay, I get it. Like, I get the immigration part. I get that I might potentially, not be earning in at least 6 months or so. But as I was like navigating in my previous base and asking like what is available, just in preparation for what I could do. And this guy, is a civilian employee, and I thought like he was like my people, I thought. So I was like, I asked him like, and then he just said like, and nothing against people working in commissary or BX, but he's like, have you tried the bagger at the BX? And I was like, oh, I haven't, but well, thank you. But part of me is like, you didn't even ask me my background. I was 40 years old. I just like literally finished my doctorate degree. Like I like really worked hard, and I'm not saying it has to match it, but I feel like, is there like a cultural thing wherein like, you're like putting me in a separate box just because of what the people that you've met and all that. And I don't want to, like, again, nothing against that person, might be just kind of like ignorance or lack of exposure, but what I'm saying is like, I really agree that with, I call her army spouse, with what she said about, having that realization that when you talk about military spouse, unemployment, or employment, we're not just talking about putting them in one box. There are different boxes. There are dividers among all those. And again, Elizabeth said something like, her experience is definitely much different, way back 10 years ago versus to now, and all that. And in addition, before I forget, like, I like recommendation 4 of the white paper. I like it because I see it. I'm very much active in sharing, especially to foreign-born spouses, like information about employment, or if they want to go into business. There's so much of those things that we have. But part of me as a researcher, I was like, how are we evaluating it? Are we just counting the number of spouses who go through a fellowship program, an internship? Are we just ticking it off and making these companies like, oh, we are military spouse friendly, we take you in? But in my head, I'm like, no, like, I feel that for me personally, the success indicator for me is for these spouses to be employed soon after. That is the key, in my opinion. So yeah, like, I really like it. And yes, Sue, I'll be I'll try to advocate like an email first, because I feel like it's too tight of a timeline. But I appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sue. I'm sure you have a follow-up. Go for it.
I do. And I'm like, there was so much to unpack in what they both said that I should have written it down. But I am Jenny, I'm also a foreign-born spouse. And I have my master's, and it was my mom who actually said, you should really look at retail. So I don't think it's necessarily people on the installations. And if it is, it's not just them, it's also our families, right? Because they look at us and we don't really fit that box. And we actually, so I didn't tell you guys, my husband's retired Air Force. We've been together for 35 years. And my horrible story is that I waited to work because, like Elizabeth, I think it was, that couldn't afford the childcare. We were in the middle of Kansas, and my 2 degrees in international relations, at the time I only had 1. No one's really looking for anybody with international experience in Wichita, Kansas. But it was going to cost me to go to work. And so we said, one of us was deploying and one of us could stay home. Guess who drew the short straw? And then after that, it was 2 back-to-back assignments overseas, no opportunities to work. And then we came back to DC, which is my town. I'm from here, when we immigrated here, and nobody would hire me. And when I finally got the call from the FBI, they wanted to send me somewhere else. Like, you guys, waiting 14 years, going through an 18-month job application process to be offered a job not where you live, and geobashing was out of this question because he was still deploying. It was devastating. And so I think we're making more strides in making sure that people understand we're not a monolith. And I actually got to speak to the deputy digital director of the White House, and she's on a working group, a data working group across the federal government. And poor lady, she's like, what can we do to help you with military spouse employment? What kind of data should we collect? And I'm like, do you have a couple hours? And she did. She sat there and listened to me for like, exactly. And then I had to go talk to somebody else. Heba pulled me away, and she's like, I'll wait for you. I'm like, sure you will. 20 minutes later, I came back. She was still waiting for me. She was interested because she's a military spouse. And apparently a lot of people, and she's very interested in it. She's like, she understands that we have to disaggregate data, that military spouses are not a homogenous group. And so what we have told her, and what we will tell anybody who will listen, because if you go back to the white papers, all the way back to the first one, is like, please disaggregate the data, because professional military spouses constitute such a small percentage, and a bigger percentage now of the whole military spouse pool, that if you just do not disaggregate the data, the story is very misleading because it sounds like we're all doing well. And the support that we need is very different. So I think that one of the things that will really move the needle is if they just start disaggregating data. So when you're talking to whoever will listen, anyone, leadership, anyone who will listen, I mean, I do this all the time. I don't even know if they care, but I'm like, just disaggregate the data. You guys are driving me freaking nuts. You don't know what the story is. You don't know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. You're trying to solve this amorphous problem called spouse unemployment. But what do you know about it? Like, do you know how many military spouses want to be underemployed? Do you know how many of them want to be unemployed? Maybe we need to develop a different lexicon, because unemployed, underemployed don't necessarily pull out the nuances of our experience. So until they do that, I don't think we can get at the root of the problem. So Jenny, you guys are absolutely right. Like, we're not a monolith. We know we're not a monolith. We need them to know that we're not a monolith, and they know, but they don't know. They also don't know what they don't know, which is, where are the pain points? And the pain points aren't going to be the same for an 18-year-old who needs a job job versus a 38-year-old who wants a career, who has a career already and needs the next progression, right? So you're absolutely right. But I did want to let you know that there is stuff being done, because there is intense interest in disaggregating the data.
Thanks you both for sharing. And to Sue's point, did like what we're at the poll question right now, I'm asking about underemployment. Like, that is something that has come up, because let's just to reiterate what the differences are. So we have unemployed, which is actively seeking work, but not employed. Then there's in the workforce, which is employed individuals plus unemployed individuals. And then there's a third category, which is out of the workforce. And out of the workforce could be by choice. It could be, what people have mentioned already, temporarily out of the workforce. But these are the different nuanced circumstances that we really need to get wrap our arms around. So I asked a question about underemployment. Let's wrap our head around underemployment. So anyone who's willing to talk about their bouts or periods of time where they felt underemployed, whether it was working part-time, what were some of the decision-making processes surrounding those moments? I heard one individual say, that was a childcare cost and we were paying to work. Is there any other circumstance that kind of puts us in these situations that anyone might be willing to share? Heather, go for it.
Find that virtual hand.
Yeah, you're good.
So Jennifer, thanks so much. And Sue, I hear everything you're saying and you're so spot on. If we could figure that out, my goodness. But so coming off of 22 years of active duty and retiring, I had a little bit of latitude to go off and help a veteran-owned small business get off the ground. And I really wanted to do that because I was in talent acquisition. I was doing business development and marketing while I was in the Navy. So I thought this could be a natural, progression for me and took the opportunity to try that. Then after, numerous years and it just didn't get off the ground like we were hoping, then I entered the workforce again and realized I didn't want that fast-paced stress that I was feeling on active duty. I had changed. I couldn't go back to that. So then I had to figure out, where do I fall now? Because I have all this experience, bachelor's and a master's, and, I really want to use my experience and knowledge at those levels. But again, the re-entry, as we were talking about it, unfortunately, it's a reality. They just look at you differently and you have to sell yourself differently. And we have to speak differently. It blows my mind how many of us still say, I'm just a military spouse. We cannot use that word just before that. We really have to take ownership of the fact that we know what we bring to the table. We are closed. That's what I call it. We're chief life officers of this lifestyle that requires project management every time you move, project management every time you got to find another school and interview different private schools if there's a special need or something like that. I mean, this is all the same kind of experience that's required in corporate America. We've got it. How do we put that on a resume and sell ourselves? That's what we have to formulate, educate, and I feel, the way forward is really representing ourselves in a different manner. And I think we're turning, towards that, but we're like an aircraft carrier, if I may use a nautical term. It takes a long time to come about. And like you said, Sue, 14 years ago, I was just retiring, coming off active duty and entering, my military spouse new job title. And I was like, oh my goodness, okay, these are different issues from veterans issues, completely different. And now I'm dual. So how do I give 50% to these and maybe help in some manner? So that's just my story. And just as an aside, I am a talent acquisition and veteran outreach leader for CSA. You probably see that in the back. And not that I'm here, Jen, to steal anyone's thunder or try to advertise for my company, but because I finally found what is fulfilling for me, I want to help you find that as well. And this company, midsize, works closely with the DoD, and it is 52% military spouse and veteran at this point.
You're welcome to drop any information about that in the chat for anyone who wants to connect with Heather. Feel free to do that for sure. Thank you, Heather, so much. Appreciate that. So as far as other instances of part-time work or being underemployed, I would love to hear some more about that, because I think that we think of it as a choice and it is a family decision, but is there anything that could make those choices easier? And if so, what? Sometimes the choice is, okay, do I choose between staying home with my very small baby because cost of childcare is so high? Well, that seems like a personal choice, but at some point there's part of that is not. And so part of it is a cost. Part of it is feeling like you get to be the driver, or else in the sharing of the poll, it's the job schedule, what childcare is available that meets the need. Is it, for those who maybe don't have kids, I would love to hear too of what other choices are there, because it's not just for, with children. Hiba, I don't know if that answer whatever question I just asked, feel free, go for it.
Hey, Jennifer, I was just going to mention, we don't have children yet. And so that's absolutely something that kind of tends to be a little bit frustrating, is that, okay, well, when we tend to talk about military spouse employment, the very first and maybe only challenge that's presented is, well, childcare is, the main or the most primary issue. And that could very well be true, that it's one of the primary barriers to military spouse employment. But again, not having children yet, that wasn't the primary barrier, right? That I experienced to employment. It was actually the fact that we're overseas. And so it's always really interesting when we talk about some of these military spouse employment programs and initiatives. And obviously, I really think the world of the work that NMSN does in this space, but because we don't have the disaggregated data to really understand what the impact is of some of those challenges or some of those experiences, some of those barriers, I don't think that we really do have a good understanding of, okay, well, do we know if military spouses overseas are more or less likely to either be unemployed, underemployed to what degree, or unemployed to what degree? We don't have that kind of visibility into, we don't have that kind of visibility into the data or into the information or into the programs. So more often than not, a lot of the programs, policies, and initiatives that I believe, we tend to talk about, with the exception of the very recent DETO signing, is about military spouse employment and only in occupational license or certification professions. And that's really difficult. But a lot of the challenges that I've experienced with unemployment or with underemployment have been because of a physical location overseas.
And to Heba's point, one of the things that we were really thrilled to see about the DETO, the MOA, a lot of people were like, why would you even work on this issue? Because it's only potentially going to impact hundreds of people. And we're like, because that's hundreds of people right now. In a month, it'll be hundreds of different people and so on and so on. And it's scalable, right? I mean, like, this is one of the very first solution sets that I've ever seen for military spouses working in a professional capacity that provides them the ability to move with their jobs overseas. So the reason we were really excited about the MOA was that this signals a departure for all the leadership and the stakeholders to work only on generational solutions, solutions that are going to benefit tomorrow's military spouses. This is like, to me, one of the few times when they took on an issue that only impacted potentially a small group of military spouses, but makes a huge impact for those who are impacted. And so we're really thrilled because hopefully this signals a change for them to start making incremental change. And I know I keep repeating words, but so I think this is what you guys should track. In order for change to occur, we don't need to look at the big, sexy changes that everybody wants. It's those incremental changes that are really going to start adding up. And then we're going to see kind of like, what is that when all the blocks kind of fall, like you put up the domino effect. They're going to set off a domino effect. And this is what's going to generate the change. We've tried it their way, which is decades of working big programs to affect change. Let's try it the spouse way, which is let's give us the non-sexy small wins and let's really help what like small population today instead of focusing on tomorrow's spouses. And I think that's how we affect the change. Is like we need to take a design thinking approach, which is small, like do a scrum, right? Small sprints, and then just finish the sprint and then reevaluate and iterate and measure the whole way. Instead of taking this like, oh, well, we have this program. We really like this program. We'll make little tweaks of the program. But is it working? And if it's not working, why is it still a program?
And Sue, and I'm going to go to you in a second, but Sue or anyone else on the call, does anyone know, have they done like longitudinal studies following different career tracks, following different like what we're talking about right now is we're all different. We have all these different backgrounds. Have they done anything to your knowledge on that at all?
So I just saw released around the same time our white paper was released that RAND actually did a paper on MyCAA effectiveness and the efficacy of the program for those who are engaged in MyCAA. And so I don't know if there are others, but that's the one that comes immediately to mind because that's the most recent.
I would just be interested to find out if that information, like we were already saying, do they have those data points for somebody who's in finance or somebody who's in childcare or somebody, whatever it is, like where are these these decision points hitting, like we've talked about in the past? Is it really just like, as Heba kind of pointed out, it's not about the children, the childcare, it's about the participation in the workforce over time. And when you step in and step out, it impacts your ability to step back in the future, potentially. And so it's looking at those moments and the differences in the career fields where those moments might not impact, because there's some people who I know who step out and they step back in, but because of the type of degree that they have, it's like, no big deal. I'm a pharmacist. I'm going to make money here and I'm going to make money here. You know, it's okay. But others don't have that luxury. So anyway, I'd be interested to see if they have any data on that.
I also think that we have to just not stop at looking at the spouse experience. We also need to look at the employer and the agency experience, because one of the things that we spoke to them about is the importance of, okay, you know how the MOA guaranteed that they are going to mitigate security concerns for DEDOs. I'm like, that's great, but without context, that's just a publicity soundbite. Does this mean that you're going to be giving less DEDOs so that when you mitigate security concerns, you're going to be mitigating 100% of those security concerns for those DEDOs that are approved, but you're now only going to give 20% of the DEDOs that you were giving before, unless they take a baseline number, a baseline snapshot of how many DEDOs existed the day that they signed the MOA, or even now, and then track that, like, we're still giving out the same number of DEDOs or more, then it's just a soundbite, right? And so when we talk about the importance of measuring the efficacy of these programs, when we talk about disaggregated data, it's very deliberate. And the other thing is, what agencies are doing a better job? Like, what agencies are hiring military spouses, and what agencies are successfully moving them through transition, whether it's a PCS, separation, or retirement, with their careers?
Yeah,
because these are data points that are available. Nobody's ever asked for them. And, you know, all of us out here are like, this is a no-brainer. Like,
yeah.
I don't even pretend to be like an expert on this. I just am someone who's more curious than the average Jill, because I have nothing but time, apparently. You know, like, I'm a one-hit wonder, and, you know, I don't know about childcare. You know, I know the top line, but this is like, spouse employment is all I know to a deep, deep level. And I think there are better experts than me out there, and they know the questions that need to be asked. We just need to push them to ask it.
Thanks, Hiba.
The only thing I was going to add to that too is, and Sue, to that very point about the implementation piece of the DEDO MOA, which is, if there's somehow in the implementation this requirement that the way they mitigate security concerns is that you have to live on base. I mean, now you're talking about it, yet another barrier that we've created for ourselves on a program, by the way, or in an effort that is meant to encourage the retention of an already employed spouse. So we're not talking about, when we talk about the DEDO, you're not talking about spouses who are not employed getting a federal job. You're talking about a spouse who's already working in a federal position, being able to take that federal position with them abroad, right? Pending a sponsorship by their employing department or agency, and pending approval, right, by the chief of mission and the State Department. But again, very real to Sue's point, all of these things look really good, but it's going to be on us and the data collection and the implementation to ensure that we really follow through and expand that opportunity in a very meaningful way. Something else, you know, to consider is that I would be willing to bet that every single person on this call has been in a conversation where either the department or organization, or just someone that you've connected with on an issue to include military spouse employment more specifically, has said, sorry, that's just not possible, right? It's just not something we've done before. So it cannot be possible. I cannot tell you how many times, obviously, this particular and Sue is laughing because she's smiling, because she knows I bring this up every single time we talk, which is, okay, I understand the SOFA, you know, does more than just impact military spouse employment. I get that. I do get that, but I do not accept that the only way to impact spouse employment overseas is either you must have a federal job, or you must be working on base. I just don't think that's the only, I don't think it's the only option. I don't think the only option is ever no.
I'm laughing because every time someone says that to me, I look at it as, then don't get in my way while I do it.
Correct.
And we should
Correct.
all think that. Like, that should be all of our mindsets. When you hear that, I just need you to flip the narrative in your mind. And what you should be thinking is, then get out of my way so I can do it. Maybe
Right.
too hard for you, but I will do it. Just don't get in my way.
Love it.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that is the real beauty and the real benefit of this year's white paper, which is just to say, look, just because we've never thought of it before doesn't mean it's not possible. Doesn't mean that answer, that solution isn't out there. And it doesn't mean that an incremental solution isn't just one step in the right direction. And if it is, we owe it to our military families to consider that as an option, right? For that option to be on the table. So I just wanted to make sure to include that.
Awesome. Thank you, Hiba. And on that note, we kind of asked an open-ended question in the poll about like what policy solution or what solution is out there. What are some of those incremental changes that you think would help your experience based on your personal journeys in employment? I'd love to hear from anyone who maybe hasn't gotten a chance to share if they are willing to kind of hear about any suggestions or you can even highlight the issue that you faced, and then we can kind of chat through what a possible solution might look like. Again, I don't mind awkward silence. Okay,
So
go for it, Jenny.
sorry, what I noticed in my previous base, they offer kind of like they encourage those spouses who don't have work to be FCC or family childcare providers. Okay, I obviously don't have kids, but that aside, like I know that because they're very much aggressive about it, and we also have, I think they're thinking, oh, like we're hitting two birds with one stone, because we obviously have a huge, in our base, the waiting time I think is like 2 or 3 years. So like that's pretty common, I'm sure. I realized soon enough that it's not just like an Air Force problem, it's a DoD problem. But yeah, I think those I don't know whether they should be under policies and all that, but I think now that when I look back, like I know just by casual conversations with other spouses who would want to have a career, they said like, I don't mind doing that, but I feel like they said, and I would quote one friend of mine, I would be doing a disservice if I'm gonna do something that it's not really my thing. Like it's only because I just need the money or we need the money, like, and it would be also unfair for the parents of these kids that I'll be there and I'm not, like, of course I'll be doing my job as an FCC provider, but at the same you know what I mean? It's those things. And as I was like listening to you, I remember the framework or like the Venn diagram in the white paper, talking about all those I guess agencies that are bringing along. And in my head, I'm also like just thinking of like a framework, like the cultural aspect of it, the institutional and personal choices that are affecting everything. And just kind of like, Sue, I know I tend to volunteer, but if there's any way that I could help a little bit, I'm passionate about kind of like helping the community, of course, but if there's a little bit that I could help a little bit with the advocacy that you've been doing amazingly. So yeah, thank you.
We will take your help.
Yeah. You said it. But awesome. Anyone else have anything they would like to share, any changes that they would like to see in that might be something that could make it into a day of advocacy bullet point in the future? I know for me it's been hard to break free of like the idea that you have to follow a very specific career path. And I think that once that understanding, I feel like there's education and mentorship that hasn't happened. I think NMSN provides that, but how do you find out about those types of organizations and resources? So perhaps a breakdown is, how do we connect spouses to this awareness of their career early on so that they're informed about the decisions that they're making? I think we know once you step out of the workforce, you might have an impact, but even the White House has come out with numbers saying that the average loss of income is about $12,000 a year. That's average income, and that's only dollars off the top. It's not lost investments and lost in retirement savings and all of that. So if we need to have more education on day one of like, these are the choices you're making. I see Army spouse, you come off mute. Feel free to share.
Yeah, I was just going going to say on that point, so back to my kind of role models and mentors. So I do a lot of mentoring through American corporate partners, but I've also done a lot of informal mentoring over the years. And I remember two specific younger military spouses that were newly married. One had been educated in Japan, spoke 3 languages, had just arrived in the US, and we connected because she was looking for someone to help with her resume. I ended up helping her find a job that was remote that would align with her spouse's career path, because we talked about the expectations to set and how to think at an early stage about how you can maintain a career when you have to move regularly. And you know, there are sort of mechanisms you can put in place by working for a company that will allow you to work remotely, by building a transferable skill set. And then the other lady was a FAO's wife in the embassies in Europe. And she was moving every year on her way to Tanzania, but she found a job with a global US company that would allow her to work remotely for as long as she needed to, global remote. So I really kind of think that, again, she had these limitations. She knew what the limitations were, but there was a match out there for her. So sometimes it's kind of with the new to military spouses, having that conversation through mentorship to understand what's feasible, and how you can then, you know, really build a career path that's going to work for you over the period of time that your spouse is serving. I think that's really important, and I haven't really seen that on a formal basis kind of happening.
Yeah, and I think like when I just launched a poll about resources, and the resources that I've used, you know, I've reached out when I was in a period of transition about going back to school. Should I do this? Is this going to be a lost investment? You know, as a military spouse, it's hard to guarantee work in the field you're about to study. And so you're making these choices, and I've used, but I did not find the military one source resource to be customized enough in my field to be able to give me the type of good advice I needed. And so I just wonder, what resources have people used, and if, like, is my experience singular? Have we used some, what would be like, do we need to be plugged into our fields? Do we need to just have guidance of how to plug into your network in your field and how to break through those networking doors? You know, I put it out there to you all if anyone wants to share or expand on their thoughts.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. This is something we always say, which is don't forget that aside from being a military spouse, you also are your own individual with your own association affiliations and your school affiliations and civilian affiliations. So when you go out there looking for resources, you should also look at the resources available in the communities, whether they're local, state, or federal. And then also look at, like I mentioned, your associations where you're going to find the job listings really in the areas that you want. And then get involved, actively involved, because, you know, 85% of jobs are never listed. They're in a hidden job market. And the only way you're going to get yourself to those jobs is through networking. So resources, yes, but it's also like the onus is on us, right? Like to get ourselves to that place where we have access to all those additional hidden resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just, you know, when you're new, kind of to the point we've talked about before, where you are in your journey, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how necessary networking is, especially in certain fields, how important it is. But like to your point, and I know this is actually something, Celine, that came up in our VLP participation of creating like the issues with veterans and starting businesses in new towns after they get out. Maybe to your point, Heather, too, of your experience, is they don't always have those local city connections to get that license approved or get that loan approved or whatever the local network. So the veteran space is looking towards building local networks for veterans, but they get to stay in one spot. So what does that look like? How do you maintain networks over time and space when you're moving all over as a military spouse? I mean, it depends on the person. I want to be respectful for everyone's time, and I can stay on a little longer after, but wanted to put everyone else, give an opportunity to share if we didn't get to share something. about your personal experience, please do. And I don't know about Sue, if we can stay on for a minute longer, we can always do that. But does anyone have anything they want to share about their experience with employment that we didn't get to cover? Hearing none, I just thank you, Sue, for joining and for sharing.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, go for it,
Just
Jenny.
want to quickly add, what Sue said is correct. So like we left my former base, my husband is currently in Korea. So I'm here in Florida, and Florida, like state level, everything, like there's so much resources that the state is offering. And you just have to, like what she said, like dig deeper, maybe even ask a few questions. I used to be one of those people who doesn't like networking because I felt like, and this is more, I think, cultural, like I felt like my work should speak for itself. But I'm learning, and in those like networking things, even virtual or in person, like suddenly someone will message me like, hey, I remembered you about this, so you might want to look at it. So I think that's very, very what do you call it, helpful in our self-discovery and career development.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you all for coming and for sharing. Thank you, Sue, for providing your expertise and also, doing all the work that you've been doing for a period of time that shall go unnamed. And I'm going to end the recording. And if for those who want to stick around, feel free. But otherwise, thank you guys for coming. And I will be sending out a summary of the conversation. If anyone participated in the transition conversation, that one's actually going to be a delayed summary because it's actually going to be my column. And so it's going to happen. The column will be the summary. So, and that's hopefully what will happen here too. So thank you. I'm going to end the recording.